Welcome back then folks to day 4 of Special Projects Pack 14. This one of course you knew was coming. I've mentioned it before in previous packs, I believe, a returning face from Gran Turismo 6. As soon as this car was added to the game, I was really hoping for an engine swap so that we could do it. Of course it's based on the C1 Corvette, which you will find occasionally in the legendary dealership, and to be honest, that is the reason why I've had to leave this for so long, because in one of the other ones that I already had, I'd already done the motor swap, which incidentally you do need to do that to this car to replicate the Art Morrison Corvette from GT6, but the problem is I'd already done the weight loss as well, so even with ballast I could not make the car heavy enough, so I had to wait for it to come all the way back around again to buy it again and not do the weight loss. So, as I choke on my own spit, the key thing there is to make sure you buy one and don't do anything to it until you're actually going to do this replica. Otherwise you'll be waiting a long time like I had to do it again. So as far as the parts go, of course you can download the livery, the full visual package that the player has done for it. Like I said, you do need to do the engine swap for this one. As far as the rest though, it's actually surprisingly simple on this one. You want sports brake pads, it's got comfort mediums anyway, I've upgraded that to sports hards, so still pretty grounded, nothing too crazy there. As far as the club sports section, sports brakes and the sports clutch and flywheel. The power restrictor and the ballast are fitted so that we can use those. As far as the semi-racing stuff, you've got the fully customised diff. I've opted for the fully customised manual box, because again you want it to have that kind of chunky feel, but obviously being the proper old school C1 Corvette, you do need a bit more use out of that gearbox than the old one's going to give you. As far as the racing stuff, not too much going on there aside from the fully customised suspension. As far as the extreme stuff, the steering angle adapter for the extra manoeuvrability and nothing in the ultimate section. So the most expensive aspects of this car are buying the car itself and doing the engine swap. Apart from that, you don't really need to do too much else. And one of the reasons why is, of course, unfortunately, this is still not accurate to the engine, which the Art Morrison used to have. I seem to recall it was a 7-litre, I think, in GT6. This, of course, even with the swap, is no way close to that engine size. It's a 6.2. But it's as good as we can get. It's close enough to feel accurate and to feel right. So as far as what we've actually done for the suspension, I've actually got a little bit of a mismatch between the front and the back. 85 on the front, 83 on the rear. 4 for the anti-roll, 25 and 35 for the dampers, 2.15 for the springs, 1.5 front and back for camber. As far as toe, fairly hefty. Towed out, 0.10 on the front, towed in, 0.30 on the rear. As far as the diff, 20, 10 and 30, so a bit different to what I'd usually do. If you give this a try, you will find it to be more challenging, for sure, and I'm going to talk about that more in a second, because I actually don't necessarily think that's a bad thing in the case of this car. As far as the transmission, I wanted it to have a pretty decent top speed, as that car used to have, and again, you've got to remember, if you have a memory from Gran Turismo 6 of this thing doing, 260, 270 miles an hour, then of course you've got to remember that was probably once you tuned it. I'm replicating the quote-unquote standard Art Morrison Corvette. So in other words, how the car felt as soon as you bought it, but didn't do anything else to it, in other words. So for the auto setting there, 320 kilometers an hour, which is up around 205-ish miles an hour. If you need to change that higher or lower, of course, that's down to you. As far as the restrictions, you want to give it a lot of restriction, that's for sure, 72% on the power restrictor. The car in GT6 has 540, so that's pretty close. You could jump under it to be 535, but 543 is more than close enough for me to be happy. As far as the ballast, you want a lot on this car, 153 kilos, bearing in mind that's with no weight loss to begin with. So, like I said, you can understand why I was no way near being able to do this with the other one that I'd already stripped out. The ballast I've actually left in the middle to keep that 5248. Incidentally, 1437 is of course the Gran Turismo 6 weight on this one. There's no downforce to worry about, and over here, barely anything to worry about in terms of fitting parts. So, all said and done, 586, close enough to 587 points. That's fairly modest, even for a car on sports tyres. And of course, speaking to it being challenging, we now need to jump out on the track to talk more about that. So, in terms of driving it, this is, if not the most challenging car this time around, definitely one of the more challenging ones. The Pontiac off-road could be a little bit challenging for some people, but I don't think it's that bad. This one, I think, is the one which will demand most of your attention, and I do have theory about that. See, I think that's accurate to how the car should feel, because even though the actual Art Morrison Corvette was a beast, you have to remember two things. Number one, as close as this looks and feels, it is not an Art Morrison Corvette. It's still an actual classic Corvette that we've just fitted parts to. So you do have to bear that in mind. You are still using a very, very old car. Secondly, and this I think is more important, Gran Turismo 6's physics were way different than Gran Turismo 7, especially now. So a car is now way more twitchy than it ever used to be back then. I seem to recall that the Art Morrison was a fairly forgiving car, I think, at least in its standard form. I didn't use it as much as many people did, but I don't recall having any major issues with driving the car. Now this one, I mean, I wouldn't say it's difficult to drive, it's more so difficult to master the car, because you can put your foot down, but of course it can spin up its wheels. The tail sliding due to the diff and the suspension isn't as bad as you might think, given how much power it's got in this super old school frame, but it does require more focus and more, of course, deliberate control of your throttle, let's say. Because at the end of the day, it's a vintage sports car, in effect, with a much more modern, way more powerful engine, and, another key to remember, a lot more weight as well. So if you do decide to use this, of course you knew it was coming at some point in special projects, and of course I hope you enjoy it, and potentially use it for some racing events as well. And of course, if you haven't already, check out the ones from the other days, which we've already done as well. But for now, thanks for watching.